Rebecca Fricka, and I'd like to welcome you here on behalf of the Amherst Housing Coalition. We would like to start off by thanking the Unitarian Universalist Society of Amherst for providing the space for free. This housing work aligns with their mission of building a free and just world. And I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters of Amherst for co-sponsoring this event. The League has members who have helped to plan this event, and you will see League members acting as scribes during the breakout sessions. And their names are in the program. The League has positions at the local, state, and national level that align very much with this housing work. And we have information over there, and you can go online also to see this alignment. So, and I should say that I am part of all three of these groups. So, welcome. And last but not least, please look on the back of your programs. I'm not going to read it out loud, but we have a long list of other co-sponsors, and thank you so much for supporting this event. At this time, I would like to welcome our esteemed Town Manager, Paul Bachman.
I have to click this thing, so I don't know if I can hold this in, click, and do all those things, so I think I have to hold it so louder. So this is a great turnout. And congrats to John and the Trust and everybody for putting the coalition for putting this together. It's like the night before the election day. Don't forget to vote tomorrow, election in Amherst. So thank you all for being here. And I also want to recognize some of our town councilors who've taken time to be here. Evan Ross, George Ryan, Andy Steinberg, Dorothy Tan, and Kathy Shane. So thank you all for being here. And I also really want to recognize our state senator and state representative, Mindy and Joe, who not only, what I like about them is that they not only get the issues, but they know how to get the issues done. And they just bring a lot of bandwidth to these things. They're showing up at everything, and we really appreciate you being here. There we go. So, I have a few slides. John has a ton of slides. No surprise to anybody. So I'm going to go do mine relatively quickly so that John can take his leisurely time to tell the story of an act in 3 plays or something like that, or something, or a play in 3 acts. So first off, I want to talk about the successes of the town of Amherst. We exceed the 10% of this subsidized housing inventory that's required or recommended by the state. Is that a good accomplishment? Yes, it is. Is it a great accomplishment? No. We should be much higher than that. 10%, where did that come from? Kind of random. When I talked to one of my classmates at Hampshire College, who lived on my door, in my floor, was Clark Ziegler, who's head of Mass Housing Partnership. I said, why'd you choose 10%? This is a long time ago. And he said, because we really want those W towns around Boston to get their affordable housing. W towns. He said, Wenham, Wayland, Wellesley, you know the ones. And I said, well, at the time I was working in Manchester by the sea. And I said, well, I guess you didn't mean Manchester. He says, Manchester's an upside down W. You need to get 10%. So we're doing really great on a number of these things. We've been at it for a long time. This town has really made a long-term commitment to developing and supporting affordable housing. We've invested over $8 million since 2010 in funds to develop and retain affordable housing. That's another big piece of it. We have the dedicated staff who've been working on this project. And tonight, I think there are about a half a dozen staff members, assistant town manager, health director, planning director, senior planner, all here tonight to participate in this because they want to hear what you think about what the priorities are. So they're taking time out of their night to be here, which I really appreciate everybody for doing that. It just shows, I think, the quality of the commitment of our staff. And we're also working, and this may come up a little bit later, on more tools to become better at developing affordable housing. So these are some of the things, I'm not sure if you can read them, that the town has done. The town meeting adopted a local tax incentive, and the select board had allocated that over $2 million in tax incentives for new construction and very deep affordability, not just 80% of the median, down to 50% of the median. Community Preservation Act Fund, CPAC money, has been devoted over $2 million since 2015. And you can see the number of projects. The CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, we've devoted money to that, and we've done some other things along those lines, not just investing in actual affordable housing projects, but making infrastructure improvements in areas where we think the greatest need is. For instance, right now you'll see construction on East Hadley Road, and we're building a multi-use path to get people from the apartment buildings on East Hadley Road make it easier for them to get to Crocker Farm School and to get to Groff Park, which we are also rebuilding. It will be open next year. For sure. We also are good at getting grants. We're a housing choice community, which that designation gives us extra points when we're applying for grants, and that helped us get a grant to do a sidewalk on East Pleasant Street, which is a good thing. We have the technical assistance for the 40R overlay district, which is in process as well. And we have the community engagement initiative for technical support from CHAPA. These are all good things that we have done in a relatively recent past. There's also a number of things that we can really be proud of, I think. And I think we should just take a minute to recognize that we have done a lot as a town. North Square, which is in the Mill District, 26 affordable units out of 132 that are being built, which is really a good number for us. University Drive, 4 units under that development it's just opened. 132 Northampton Road. So we're looking at 30 units of transitional housing, and the town council has supported that effort so far. There's a long way to go in the processing of it, but that's an important need that's been identified by the town so far, and that's moving forward. Habitat for Humanity, first-time home buyers program, and a big one is preserving the Rolling Green affordable units. That was a major investment in the town to make sure that those units stayed affordable. Those are all really good things. We need to do those things because the economy is strong. It's kind of intractable. There's a lot of people who want to live in Amherst. Money is cheap, so developers can borrow money at relatively low interest rates, and the demand is there for people. So the economic forces for Amherst to move into a higher income community has to be mitigated by efforts like these to make sure that we have a diverse array of housing that's available to everybody, everything from first-time homeowners to rental to subsidized housing. We need the range so that we keep the kind of community that we want to keep. People come here because they want a diverse community with a range of people who they interact with on a daily basis. If we just let the market forces work the way they do, land prices drive development, we won't be able to, we will become a community that we don't want, I think, for most people at least. We've also had a number of multifamily housing units being developed downtown and other places in town. That's not affordable housing, but it sort of shows you what the pressure is that the market is driving us towards. So we've done some tools. We talked to you about the money we put in, the grants that we brought in. We also have done some tools like the inclusionary zoning bylaw in 2018. You can read them up there. This is sort of inside baseball. It's all laws and zoning bylaws primarily that have been developed by the town in order to increase the supply of affordable housing Some of them work, some of them don't work so well. We're gonna be looking at them and trying to make them better. We've also looked, we have a municipal property disposition committee. So if we own a piece of land, the town, meaning we the town, we don't need it. We want to get it back out there and be looked at. So one of those examples is the East Street School. We have an RFP out for the East Street School. We hope that developer will come in and develop affordable housing. And one way we can make it affordable is by making the land free or low cost. So that's how you change the dynamics of a market-driven economy. So I don't want to, I'm going to end on this one, because challenges is my middle name. It's like, that's what we deal with every day in the town. And it's, these things, all these great investments are great over time, but the town, especially the town council, are facing some really fundamental challenges going forward. We all talk about the 4 major capital investments that we have to make, the elementary school or schools, the library, the DPW, and the fire station. And these are not saying we need new ones of these. It means all of these buildings need attention, whether it's a new structure or a renovation or just fixing it up. They need money. It's not like, should we pay it or it's zero? It's, should we pay it or do we pay the alternate amount to put in a new roof or systems or something like that? So I'm trying to lay the groundwork that money's going to be tight. In addition to those 4 major capital projects, there has been a clearly articulated need for better investment in our roads and sidewalks, which we've been trying to do over time. The maintenance of our existing buildings, like the Bank Center, the Town Hall, the police station, they all need attention. They need, Town Hall has a slate roof, and it takes money to make sure that that beautiful slate roof is in good shape. And the latest thing has been, I think the town council is going to be pretty clear about wanting to see an investment in sustainability initiatives. That's something that we haven't really invested as well as we should have in the past. And I think they're going to say, what are we doing to move to a carbon-free or carbon-neutral building stock and vehicle stock for the town. And we have staff needs. If you go to any department and say, do you need more staff? They will say yes. And here's how we can do it. And you will say, wow, I'm convinced that you need more staff. We recently did a fire staffing study. It was clear that there needs to be more staff for the fire department. Intervening since that, we lost our runs for the Hadley, which is about 20% of our ambulance runs. But this week has been a pretty week from heck for our firefighters, and they did a magnificent job. 2 major fires, a chemical spill or event, 3 major fires actually. So those we don't staff to those emergencies, but the ongoing regular needs of the town are very challenging to all of our departments. So one of our challenges, I think, is to find options that don't require tax dollars, because there's going to be such a demand on tax dollars, and that's where a lot of the sort of creative thinking, seeking grants, looking at regulatory changes, all come into place. And so I'm looking forward to what you guys say tonight, and eager to hear your comments.
Thank you, Paul, and thank everybody for coming this evening. My name is John Hornick. I am chair of the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. That's a mouthful. If you're curious about that organization, there is a one-page handout sitting on the table with other materials from sponsors of tonight, and so I would urge you to pick that up and also take a look at the other materials that are there too. And if you don't know about those organizations, maybe you should learn something about them, because we really do appreciate their responses, their sponsorship. Okay, let's see. What am I doing, the arrow?
Arrow.
Good.
You did it.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, A+. Okay, so as Paul said, I have a little longer story. He talks about the cup being half full primarily, and it's a little bit longer story to talk about the cup being half empty. And that's what I will focus on. Does this sound familiar? This town suffers from a severe housing shortage. We want to be a welcoming and livable city, but people of all ages, backgrounds, and occupations are struggling to keep or find a home here. Our adult children can't afford to live here. People who work here can't afford to move here. Seniors can't afford to stay. A combination of high land prices, restrictive zoning, an unpredictable, often lengthy permitting process, and neighborhood opposition to new family development is making it very hard to build the kind of housing we need. Now, probably none of you are going to recognize that. It comes from the city of Newton, whom we all think of as a pretty progressive, well-financed, liberal city. And while I won't say this is a good description of Amherst, some people might say it is, or at least it is in part. And so it's something I think we want to consider. If you want to find it, Newton has both a Facebook page and a website for an affordable housing organizing group called Engine Number 6. So take a look at that. So I'm talking about why a town policy. Oh, didn't make it. You know, maybe doing it from under here is the problem. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So Amherst has no goals for the development of affordable housing. It hasn't stopped us from doing some development, but we don't really have goals. And if we're going to progress, I think we need to have goals. As someone once said to me, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So what have our current policies achieved? Here are some true stories and fun facts. And someone looked at this, I said, are these really true stories? Yes, all of them are. And they're just a few of the stories that people have told to me. And I'm sure you all may be familiar with other stories that are similar. Edward, a single parent who works for the town of Amherst, lived in a brick house for many years, with rent increasing each year. 2 years ago, it reached the point where it was no longer affordable, and he and his son had to move out of Amherst. Now, that's not a unique event. The numbers of families with school-age children have been decreasing in Amherst. We estimate 700 fewer such families since the year 2000. And over the same period, the Department of Education tells us that there are over 1,000 fewer children. So the demography of our community is changing, and it has to do with the affordability of housing. Welcome school teachers. Beth, a school teacher in another local school system, has lived in Amherst for several years with her 2 children in a market rate apartment. She was facing an increase in rent that would force her and her children to leave this community. Luckily for her and her family, at the 11th hour, literally, she received a better paying teaching position, so she is able to stay. Renter households have substantially less income to cover monthly housing costs. Homeowners are generally in a better position, well, I'm not going to share that data. Basically, we have steadily rising rents and other costs, and at this point, 57% of renter households are either cost burdened or severely burdened. And again, if you take a look at the next slide, the kind of middle gray chunk on the left represents those who are cost burdened, which means that over 30% of their income is spent on their housing costs. And if you look at the darker gray, That's 40% of people.
We're seeing yellow, green, and blue.
Oh, sorry.
You're gonna like
I'm
what-
colorblind, what can I tell you? So anyway, yes, okay. So the darker blue, or the deep blue, whatever we want to call it, represents households that are spending over 50% of their income on housing. Those are, again, rental families, and that's about 40% of the community. So when you look at the over 30% and the over 50%, together they add up about 57% of people who are really threatened. Okay, new PhD arrives in Amherst, wonderful. Susan, a new PhD, came to UMass last year from another state on a research fellowship. She was unable to find affordable housing in Amherst. So she returned to the community she grew up in, living with her parents 45 minutes away from Amherst. The vacancy rate in Amherst is said to be around 3% or maybe less, and as a consequence, it's really difficult for people, particularly who have modest or low incomes especially, to be able to find housing here. And one last example. Hooray, I got a Section 8 voucher. People may know Section 8 vouchers are a HUD program administered locally by the Amherst Housing Authority. And people can stay on the waiting list for a Section 8 voucher, or actually the proper name is a mobile housing voucher, for 5 years, 10 years, depending on the community. But it's a long time. So finally, someone comes up on the waiting list and they get this voucher. And what happens? Well, here we have an example of a particular person, James, who was homeless and was awarded a voucher from AHA. He found a unit in Amherst, but in order to pay to move in, he has to have his portion of first month's rent, which is $200. The rest is paid by the voucher. But then he needs last month's rent, which is the full amount, $950. He needs the security deposit, another $950, plus he has to pay an agency finder's fee. So overall, he needs to pay almost $2,600 to move in. Again, not an isolated case. Talking to Erin Cassidy, who runs this program at AHA, she told me that of 70 persons receiving these mobile vouchers from the Housing Authority in the past 2 calendar years, only 24%, or 16, were able to rent up in Amherst. So the others who were able to rent up were in communities surrounding Amherst as far south as Holyoke and Springfield, and actually not everybody was able to rent up. So, there are problems in River City, and we need to do something about it. And what the Housing Trust has developed is a proposed affordable housing policy, and I'm just hitting some of the highlights here. Creation of rental families for families, particularly those earning below 50% of area median income, and the growing number of smaller households that are increasingly single parents with children. And I know 50% of area median income is an arcane term, so to give you some idea about what that means, for a family of 4, that would be around $45,000 in annual income. If we talk about 80% area median income, another term that's thrown around, that would be today around $75,000. So something that we might consider not a bad income is considered lower income if you want to be able to rent in Amherst. Okay, so let's move on. And here's a different picture of our community. This is the age distribution of the population. It's set up, and I don't know if you can read it, in 5-year intervals. The important thing is, you might notice there are 2 blue buildings or whatever that sit up pretty straight. Now what you may not see, because it's a little light, is there are dashed figures or boxes that show the rest of the state. So Amherst is in blue, and then the rest of the state is above it. If you look at the rest of the state, the distribution is pretty even across the age range. As you would expect, the percentage in each starts to go down as you get to older groups. But Amherst doesn't look like that. We're a pretty unique town. And we've been getting that way more and more year by year. At this point, over 50% of Amherst are people, I think between 18 and 25 or something like that. So we have a pretty unique community. Go on to the next slide. What else do we know about this community? How many people are there at this large institution to the north of us, the University of Massachusetts? And how much on-campus residential capacity is there? Well, what we know, and this is something that we didn't make up, but actually is public data from the university, is in the year 2000, there were about 12,600 more students enrolled at the university than could be housed on campus. That was the gap. And as of a year or so ago, that gap has increased to almost 17,000. And again, you can see the gap has been steadily rising. It's not exactly a straight line, but it is a regular increase. So what is the university doing about this? Well, again, I want you to remember these numbers and rounding off a little bit. Basically, 30,000 students enrolled, both undergraduate and graduate. On-campus residential units, roughly 13,000 today. And what's the gap? 17,000. That is the number of students who are looking for housing in Amherst or in the surrounding communities. The university did recently announce some plans to do some new building, but once we began to dig into them, here's what we found. Roughly 1,000 new units are to be built, slightly less than that, but that's good for rounding off. 120 of them will replace existing family units in North Village. 180 will replace existing units at Lincoln Apartments. And then they also plan to renovate some other existing units on the campus. And the number I put there is 300, it might be 400, so I'm not absolutely certain what the final number is. And I don't think any of these are bad plans. They're all good plans. It's great that the university is doing this, but if the actual net number of new units is only 400, we're not making a very big dent in that gap of 17,000, which means we're not doing much to reduce the problem of housing costs and the housing market issues that we have in Amherst. Now, do you recognize this game? Probably everybody played this game when you were a kid. We have a version of it in Amherst. What we do with respect to housing in Amherst is we hold the number of homes almost constant, but we steadily increase the number of people seeking homes. So we're not taking chairs away, we're leaving chairs and maybe adding a chair or two, but we are adding a significant number of new players to the game year after year, thus driving up the cost of both rentals and home ownership. So that's the game that we're in. What are the consequences of these policy decisions? The largest landlord in Amherst, and you may not think of them this way, is the University of Massachusetts. It controls most of the supply, 13,000, or capacity to serve 13,000 students. As it makes decisions on student enrollment, it controls most of the demand. When its demand, that is the university demand, outstrips the university's supply, it has a very large economic impact on the community. It creates problems not only for students, but for people who work for the university, people who work for the town, and people who work for local businesses. They can't find housing here. Just one side note, I went to the town council hearing on North Village that was now a couple of weeks ago. And 3 to 4 people introduced themselves to testify about North Village, but in introducing themselves, they each said, I live in Sunderland, or I live in East Hampton, or I live in Belchertown, and I want to live in Amherst, but I can't afford to live here. So what do we need? Summarizing, a set of reasonable goals of 250 new affordable units. It may take us 5, 6, or 7 years to get there, but honestly, if we don't set goals and work hard on it, we will never get there. We want to assure these new units are available to both individuals and families, including persons who are homeless, disabled, elderly, etc. We want to assure that these new units are not segregated or isolated, but close to services, including transportation. We want to assist people seeking affordable housing in identifying and accessing available homes. Remember the problem I talked about with the housing vouchers led by the Amherst Housing Authority? There really are no mechanisms. The Housing Authority itself really doesn't have enough staff to assist people in identifying affordable units. So people basically are given the newspaper and the rental ads and whatever, I guess maybe Craigslist now, and it's up to them to find a place. And it's not easy, as we've said. We need to maintain our commitment to supporting the Amherst Seasonal Shelter, even as we develop new housing. And finally, we need a partner in the university that recognizes its role in the local housing market and formally agrees to develop, I would say, 3,000 to 5,000 new units on campus for its students, including those with families. But then, appreciating all of you being here, above all, we need your ideas and your advocacy. Thank you. Okay, so I'm not quite to give up yet. Actually, on the night before Election Day, it is fitting that we will hear from our state legislators who both celebrated their first political victories exactly 1 year ago. I was introduced to Mindy 7 years ago when we were both working on the campaign to elect Elizabeth Warren as our state senator. At that time, she headed up a training group for the State Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, focusing on AIDS and other health issues among persons who used illegal substances. A year or so later, I looked around and she had become the new executive director of the Amherst Survival Center, successfully integrating its clients, staff, programs, and volunteers into a new building in North Amherst. And while it seems it must be a lot longer because of all she has accomplished, she just began representing us in the Great and General Court last January. I met Joe much more recently in the office of a Northampton attorney and political mastermind, Tom Lesser. He called me and said he had someone I should meet. Tom had decided he was done working on political campaigns, and then he met Joe Comerford and changed his mind. I couldn't refuse Tom's invitation. As you all know, Joe pulled off a near miracle, beating 4 other candidates in the race for state senator. What's most remarkable is that she won in a write-in campaign, which simply does not happen. Joe's success was due to the remarkable combination of her community networks and her community organizing skills, honed through stints with the American Friends Service Committee, the National Budget and Priorities Project, and Move On, all organizations in which she held key leadership positions. Now she has taken her formidable talents and energy and channeled it into representing us in the state Senate. So it is with great pride and personal pleasure that I introduce to you our outstanding state legislators, Mindy Young and Joe.
So thank you, John. That was lovely. And thank you for your organizing, your key organizing. Paul, thank you for kicking us off. And thanks to you all so much for your advocacy. It's really lovely to join my sister partner in this work, Mindy Dom, as your state senator. And I just want to say that, you know, I just want to recognize that Steve Connor is in the office, and my race with Steve was just made all the more precious because he was such a great candidate and continues to be such a staunch advocate, especially on these issues, and especially on these issues of housing, and especially for our women and men who serve our nation. So thank you. About each other, but I thought we promised each other that we weren't going to do that, so we're going to try not to. But let's just say that, you know, in Mindy, I can't ask for a better partner. There isn't a better partner in the state legislature for a senator like me, and together we understand that we are stronger if we link arms on behalf of communities like Amherst and our other shared towns. And so in Mindy, we have a fierce advocate who suffers not a fool in the world and is just an unbelievable colleague in the House. So we join hands on your behalf every single day. And it is with joy that I do that part of the work. Okay. We're going to go quickly. So I thought we had an introductory slide, but we can go right to the numbers. We'll go right to the numbers. Okay. So what Mindy and I have prepared is just a look at how the state, as your partner here in Amherst, for Paul, for the town council, for John, for all of you who care about housing, how we're doing in terms of bringing home both legislation and money, right? A budget should be our values and numbers. It should be a moral document. And so this is how we're doing in terms of making your priorities at the local level manifest in Boston. And I'll just say one thing briefly, which is that as the Senate Chair of Public Health, it is clear to me that housing is not only a right that you are fighting for here at the local level, but it is a public health imperative for the Commonwealth. We understand that decent and fair housing is one of the main underpinnings of a person's well-being. So I'm just going to run us through this quickly, and Mindy's going to dive deeply into legislation. So overall, I want to tell you that in the last budget cycle, which was the fiscal year 2020 budget cycle, overall, and it's not only represented in these numbers, we did about $23.4 million better for affordable housing than we had in the fiscal year 19. And that's good. It's good because organizations like the Western Mass Network to End Homelessness, which is active, I know John is part of that, and this work is expansive up and down the Valley. Steve is part of that, and many others I'm sure in this room, really showed us exactly the line items that we should be advocating on behalf of communities like Amherst, but also CHOPA, a statewide advocacy organization, really threw down this budget cycle, I was told by my colleagues. So clearly the imperative and the need and the actual gaps that John articulated in affordable housing are felt statewide, and it helped us, I think, do a better job. So quickly in this alphabet soup, let me just tell you that the MRVP program, many of you may know, is the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. This is an incredibly important program. It's like a sister program to Section 8, which John rightly said is a HUD program administered here locally. So these MRVP vouchers are in some way a little bit more flexible than Section 8 vouchers. We need them. They offer both tenant and project-based rental subsidies. The AHVP are the alternative housing voucher programs, and they're voucher rental assistance for non-elderly folks who are currently disabled. And so what you see in the housing world at the state level is some fracturing into smaller pots of money. It's not impossible to track, but it is good when you're advocating for programs to know exactly the program that you want us to amplify. The RAFT program, which is the next one down, is the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. This is critically important. It provides short-term financial assistance to families of currently low income who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, right? So this is as much an emergency assistance pool as it is a prevention pool. And then the home base, Mindy and I were talking about this today. The home base is the Commonwealth's rehousing benefit, and it was created to provide families who are in emergency shelter or assistance systems an opportunity to overcome some of the financial barriers to ending their homelessness. Now you'll see this program actually went down by 6 million, roughly 6 million, a little over. And so we talked a little bit about that among ourselves. We talked to colleagues in the building, and in fact, you know, this is where I think sometimes hanging on to state programs can be challenging, because the money, you know, overall we're not positive. This program was not seen as an effective carrier for all of this money, so some of it was diverted to other programs. So we can, of course, talk more about that. And then the last one is the unaccompanied homeless youth money, which is a pretty critical pot of money for organizations and shelters serving young people who are currently homeless. So in addition to that money, we saw a 10% increase in state subsidies to housing authorities and public housing nonprofits. That's of course critical, right? Because it's not only the state has to meet community-based organizations. And then one thing I'd like to say is that's pretty wonderful is that in the supplemental budget currently passed in the House and the Senate, has yet to go to conference, but in that supplemental you'll see approximately 10 million more to support specifically the creation of units for extremely low-income households. And that's going to be administered through a grant program. So again, that's actually responding to some of the stressors that towns have said, that, you know, affordable is relative term, so we actually have to develop extremely affordable housing. So I'm going to turn this over to Mindy now.
You want to do the de-excise?
Oh, yes, I do.
Let's start legislation with you.
Okay, good, all right. Thank you, Mindy. All right, so we just wanted to crack open some of the bills that we think are particularly interesting. And here's one I filed, actually. And this is interesting only because as we talk about legislation that is going to be in this housing advocacy pool, we also have to talk about how the heck we're going to fund it. And so at the beginning of the session, Liz Malia, Rep. Liz Malia, who's a close colleague of Mindy's, just really sort of a badass, sorry to curse, but you know, a great representative, been in the building a long time. And I filed this legislation. It's a deeds excise tax. Initially when we filed it, it was meant to tap the significantly high luxury real estate market, especially in the W's. Out east, right? Especially where there is concentrated wealth and some very concentrated population, right? And ask them to pay a fairer share when their property is transferred. However, and here's a great story, we filed it. We had great colleagues on our revenue, we're both on revenue, the revenue committee, we're interested in it, but then something much better happened than we could have imagined, which is that the statewide Affordable Housing Coalition got together with the environmental movement because the governor filed a version of just this bill, but dedicated only to the environment. And they said, hey, we've got folks in the legislature wanting to work on affordable housing, that was me, and we've got the governor saying, hey, let's do this luxury real estate, super uber luxury real estate tax, but focus on the environment. Well, we feel bad taking housing money essentially for the environment, and the affordable housing people said, well, join us then, join us. So they've created what's known as now the HERO Coalition. This is very exciting. We're a long way from the finish line, I will tell you. But Senator Adam Hines and I are working with the HERO Coalition on a new bill. So it won't be the bill I filed, and it won't be the bill the governor filed, but hopefully we'll find with our House colleagues an ability to look at 50% for climate change mitigation, which would come back to communities like Amherst in the form of the MRVP program, the municipal vulnerability program that you all access here, and then 50% in affordable housing. And some of that would come to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and some of that would come from preservation and stabilization. So we're thinking about $350 million more over time. So again, these are pieces of the puzzle in working with you and for you to develop both the funds and the right policies for affordable housing. Now my formidable friend.
Thank you so much. Are you controlling the slides?
Unless you want.
Oh, no, please. I'm not sure I could do it. So I'm going to just talk about a couple of specific bills, but I also want to just take one moment to say, not only thank you so much for electing me to represent you in the House, but really my enduring gratitude for also Joe coming for today. So we sort of break the mold, I think, a little bit in the state legislature along with Rep. Lay and Rep. Carey, because we didn't know that actually the House and the Senate aren't supposed to get along. And so we do get along, and people look at us a little bit like, that's not supposed to happen. And we're like, well, that's how it's going to happen for Western Mass. And so hopefully it'll also leverage some power. So thank you so much. So I just, when I first got to the House, I met with some experts on housing, and they said it's not enough to say affordable housing. You have to think about affordable for whom. And that sort of hovers above me when we have these conversations, because we need to think about what income groups and what people we really are thinking about for affordable housing. And I'm not here to say who we should be thinking of. I just want to kind of share that bit of wisdom that I got, that it's not enough to say affordable. We really need to sort of focus on who, and then we kind of create a program, or we tap into the program that allows us to reach that. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of some specific bills. The first ones are about anti-displacement, and I really love this bill, right to legal counsel, and I actually think this is going to move, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So first of all, one thing we know is that most people who are evicted don't have legal counsel during eviction proceedings. And so there's a big need to have legal counsel. Tenants don't know their rights. Housing law is very complicated. Judges often get involved to try to educate tenants as well as adjudicate. So it takes a lot longer to take care of these cases. And so several of our colleagues put in a bill to say you have a legal right to counsel if you're a tenant and a landlord. Indigent tenants and landlords. That was a bit of a compromise from last year so that they could actually get more support. And I think this is going to pass, because last week the Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts came out and endorsed it. And judges don't usually endorse things, and when they do, when it concerns housing court, the legislators their ears pick up and they sort of pay attention in a different way. And this would be an incredible benefit to everybody. It would definitely result in less evictions, and it would also result in smoother proceedings in courts. So that's one bill that actually already had their public hearing. I don't think it's been voted out of committee, and we'll talk about how you can get involved in those kinds of, with those kinds of timing in a little bit. I also want to just point out that 70% of landlords in eviction cases have lawyers, and 7.6% of tenants have lawyers currently. So this would really sort of level the playing field when it comes to anti-displacement efforts. The next thing I want to talk about is the homes bill, which is around sealing eviction records, right? And it's about making sure that those records after 3 years are sealed. Eviction records haunt people, and they haunt the children of families who've been evicted. So that when they go to try to rent an apartment in 10 years, 15 years, that eviction record comes up and can often mean that that person doesn't get to rent the apartment. So this is another effort at anti-displacement. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm looking at a different one. So I had a picture, I had a slide, I'm just going to talk about this one. Okay, I want to talk about this one. It's not because it's me. The other woman in that picture is Francine Rodriguez. I don't know if folks know her. She's the housing case manager for Family Outreach of Amherst. And so when I first started this job, I went to Housing Court in Hadley and I sat in on a couple of sessions. And when I came out, there was Francine with one of her clients. And to me, this is actually underscores the importance of getting legal counsel, because a housing case manager is a support person and a companion and someone who can help a person go through the system, but they're not legal counsel. And so Francine was there because she was accompanying somebody who was facing eviction. But again, not legal counsel. She happened to be before a judge who didn't mind taking the time to explain the law, but that otherwise, that person would have probably been evicted, and the person she was there with that day did not get evicted. So I just want to hat tip to Family Outreach, an organization that many of us support and love, and their folks are there. Okay, so the next one, the rental voucher program. So you saw in the budget that on the rental voucher, it was increased, and this was a priority for the housing advocates this year. They wanted to increase it so that it reached market value. The vouchers that Massachusetts was giving were going under market value, so you had that gap. And then people had to come up with those resources. So they raised the amount of the vouchers, and they also put different things in there, like an apartment that was going to get a voucher had to be up at a certain standard for habitation, which hadn't been there before. So that's all great. A rental arrearage assistance program, I can't really pronounce that, so forgive me. That's sort of like, we have it on a local level in a little bit. Where's Julie Ferdinand? So we have this kind of fund on a local level, where if someone is going to be risking getting eviction, we can refer them to the Department of Health, and we can kind of assess if we are able to help that person stay in their home. This is on a state level and will probably help to fund those kind of local efforts. So that is a bill that's in right now, and these are all bills that Senator Comerford and I are both co-sponsors of. Next slide. How to make your voice heard. I think this is for you, Joe, in terms of the
Yes, I got it.
sequence. Yep, here you go.
Let's see if we
It's
can get it.
difficult today.
Vera, we can go to the next one.
This was.
Okay, so we put this together for you. We know that you are the fiercest advocates, and you have had an unbelievably close relationship with state, with amazing state colleagues, whose batons we've picked up. But we just wanted to make it clear that we really want and need your advocacy for the fiscal year 2021 budget. So here's the cycle, here's how it works. In January, we get the governor's budget. He's already at work on it. We're already at work with agency partners to make sure that priorities that we care about are going to go into their budgets that are going to the governor's budget so that he can put out the budget. And that's been a long process that it's almost like we never stopped doing a budget in the legislature. Then we'll see a House budget, and that's where the fierce Rep. Dom gets engaged. And we will work, Mindy will surface ideas on behalf of her towns, and certainly I am then completely tuned in to what she's doing to make sure that I understand all of the feedback she's getting, not only from you all, but all the housing advocates with regard to tonight's conversation, who are telling Mindy yes to this line item, no to this line item, this is way too low, we need to move this over, we have to change the restrictions on this, right? So Mindy does her work all the way through late April, and then we get the budget in the Senate side. The whole darn process happens again. The Senate puts out a budget, and it's almost like it's a new budget, right? The governor puts out a budget, people sort of look at it, get a little bit interested, but then mostly focus on the House. We really focus on the House for a good long time, and then we focus on the Senate. So there are three basic budgets that go down to two pretty quickly, the House and the Senate budget. But all along the way, and especially in the red star items, that's when you should feel free to really talk to us intensely about the needs, your needs and interests, what's working for you and what's not working for you. That's where we're most powerful, Mindy and I. And then I vote, and we tell you, Mindy and I have pledged to tell you how we vote. We work for you and nobody else. So we will tell you how I vote on both the budget and all of the amendments. And then it goes to conference committee. And then Mindy made a good point as we were reviewing these, that we could have and should have put a red star right there at the governor as well, which is that, the town of Amherst, and I don't think we can understate this enough, the town of Amherst is really unique in your ability to both seize on legislative issues and act on legislative issues. And it is, your presence is felt in the building and it makes us all better. So all along this process, you're taking the time to light up the phones and the emails makes the end product better. And we saw this most acutely, and I would say to everybody's benefit in the education reform work, where it followed a similar process, a little bit different as you know, but Amherst threw down, and everybody benefits because you did.
I want to say also, we've also felt it in terms of the funding for Craig's Doors. So Craig's Doors is an example of an organization that received an earmark for several years. And then we finally got through a group of relationships, the governor to include it in his budget. And that shifted the way its trajectory went so that it sort of helped to secure funding for that service. So that's working with it. That was also Craig's Doors, and very honestly, that was Stan Rosenberg, that was Solomon Goldstein Rose, that was a lot of people, that was a baton I picked up. And Jane Banks, who works and I brought it home, timing was everything. So I just want to point out though that that is another way that money comes through, whether it's through an earmark or the governor's budget sort of allows it to get pushed through in a good way when it has something that we want. So there's a couple things. When the governor's budget comes out, advocacy organizations immediately pile on it to identify what they want and what they don't want. And they provide fact sheets to us as elected officials and to you as members of the Commonwealth. If you're interested in affordable housing, I strongly suggest that you start to review those fact sheets and then let us know, tell your legislator, what funding impacts you, and I'm going to recommend that you do that by line item and theme. So that means there'll be numbers next to certain things. That helps us. Because when it's, we want $13,000 more for this housing program that we think houses people, that doesn't help us because there's like 30 housing programs. But organizations will do that for you. They'll tell you exactly what the line item is. And if there are organizations or services you rely on that may receive funding and that you're concerned they won't, that's the time to let us know what's the impact if you don't get the funding. So that narrative, that story is important. I'm going to say the budget also contains these what's called outside sections, which isn't necessarily money. It's more like, I'm going to say, the legislator's way of passing legislation without going through the legislative process. So they're trying to pass, or we, not they, pass legislation because the budget is moving. It's like a train that's going through. So they're trying to hook up a car that has legislation that's not necessarily the budget to a vehicle that's going through. Sometimes that can be housing legislation. So that's another thing to sort of keep our ears open for. Are the advocates planning on doing that? And if so, that's definitely something that Joe and I are going to want to hear about if you support it or not. Because the outside section, sometimes it's, why are we doing it that way? That's what we're going to ask. Is that an important thing? Is there any other way to do this? Usually not. And then kind of throw our support to it. Thank you. So in terms of bills and legislation, and I know many of you know this already, this is just sort of a review. The first way we get to show support for a bill and be your voice to support it is through co-sponsorship. And for the House members, for House bills, that's within the first 4 weeks of the session. So that period has passed for House bills. Senate bills can be co-sponsored at any time in the session. So that means that if there's a Senate bill that was introduced in January and I'm not on it, I can still co-sponsor it today. But if there's a House bill that was introduced in January, that time has passed. So what does that mean? There's usually a House and a Senate companion bills. If you want a co-sponsorship and your legislator is not on it, find the Senate version because that's the version that we can co-sponsor. Ask us to co-sponsor that one. So what we do is we begin the communication with committee members, and so should you. Every bill goes to a committee, it's fine to let them know how you feel about it. I'm a big believer, if you're gonna write to the committee, usually in this case, the Joint Committee on Housing, and tell them your opinion on particular bills, I'm gonna ask you to CC Joe and me, for 2 reasons. We should know that it's of interest to you, and they should know that you let us know, because that gives us a way to open a door and say, I'm hearing from my constituents. So by putting it as a CC, or by making it open, you're sort of giving us, not necessarily permission, but a way to open the door with those committee members and say, we have constituents who are concerned about this. So the process is, we want to have every bill gets a public hearing in the House and in the Senate. That's a beautiful part about Massachusetts. Every single bill will be scheduled for a public hearing, and every single member of the public has the right to come and testify. If you can't be there in person, you can send in written testimony, again, CC us, so we can make sure that the committee receives it. And when that testimony is given, one of the things you're going to ask for if you want that bill to become a law is you're going to ask for a favorable report. Sadly, in Massachusetts, when bills get turned to study, even though we're the brain state, it's like they die. I think we should change that. We have so many colleges, and it's like we're sending that to study, and really that's like the kiss of death for a bill. But we want to ask for a favorable report.
Now, can I just say one thing?
Please.
The other thing that's really amazing is when we testify, we often find ourselves testifying together for bills that we care about, or that you care about, more importantly, we can quote you. And that is an unbelievable thing. If I say, you know, this amazing person from Amherst said these things, much like the quotes that you used tonight, John, you felt, right, I felt something shifting inside of me when it's a real person behind the imperative. So that is an unbelievable thing. Then we deliver your testimony right in person after we've quoted you. And I will say, and I'm sure you're going to underscore this, it absolutely makes a difference. Testimony absolutely changes the calculation. Not only from us, in fact, we're not the most important part, it's actually you are in this legislature. That's the truth.
I also think that when we're able to quote you, it gives us power in the room to even be testifying. Because then everybody respects the fact that we're representing constituents. And everybody in the building is an expert on something, but we're all representing constituents. So by speaking your voice, literally, during hearings, that's what's giving us power in that moment. So I strongly recommend it. I just wanted to say one more thing about help us be strong advocates for you. So if you're concerned about something, let us know. If you want to apply for something, let us know. Give us an opportunity to weigh in and support it. Give us an opportunity to help facilitate technical assistance for you, an opportunity to meet with administration, whatever it is. So there is this great website, and I can't speak enough about this website. It's got all these secret things in it that are wonderful, but this is the way to track legislation. And so at some point, I am more than happy to come back. I'm sure Senator Comerford would be also, to just sort of surf this website with people so you can see all the bells and whistles. But it's pretty straightforward, so I encourage you to go into it. And if you have questions when you're into it, feel free to email us and we can say, oh no, we have to go it this way. But the main thing is, you see that little person on that upper right? The icon? So you can create an account and you can track legislation. So I'm going to encourage you on your own, maybe to find out how that works. And if you're not sure, give us a call and I'm happy to kind of talk that through with you.
Me too.
Thank you. Thanks, John.